Most leaders believe control begins when something happens. I used to believe that too. When the call comes in, when someone says, "Would you ever consider dot, dot, dot?" When a board member casually asks, "Should we at least explore this?" It feels like that's when the real work starts. It isn't. By the time the conversation begins, your position has already been set. Let me make this practical. Imagine your phone rings tomorrow. It's not dramatic, just exploratory. Someone expressing interest. In that moment, one of two things is true. Either you already understand how the conversation would be handled inside your institution, or you don't. That difference determines control, not performance, not optimism, structure. Before exposure ever begins, there are basic decisions that quietly determine leverage. Who leads the response? Is that understood, or would you be figuring that out in real time? If advisors are needed, do you know already who would be engaged and how? Or would you start making calls while everyone is waiting for direction? If information is requested, how fast can you produce it? Not eventually, how fast? If shareholders start asking questions, are their expectations aligned? Or would philosophy surface for the first time under pressure? None of this requires intent to sell. It requires clarity about structure. Here's what most institutions do. They wait. They assume they'll deal with it when something happens. That feels disciplined, feels patient. They've watched strong banks take that approach. What happens next isn't dramatic. Acceleration begins, timelines compress, the caller wants clarity, board members want context, advisors begin offering direction, even if the institution is strong. And once acceleration starts, the room shifts. You're no longer setting the pace. You're responding to it. That's where leverage begins to narrow. Not because the bank is weak, because it's organizing under pressure. Control is not flashy. It's procedural. It's knowing in advance who speaks first and who doesn't. It's knowing what gets gathered before anything gets shared. It's knowing what information leaves the building and what doesn't. If those decisions have already been made, you stay steady. If they haven't, you're catching up. And catching up changes tone. Now let's talk about timing. Control of timing doesn't mean you're planning to act. It means you understand what would have to be true for action to be considered. There's a difference. If you've never examined governance alignment or shareholder philosophy or leadership depth, then timing is always abstract. And abstract timing is not control. Real timing awareness comes from having already looked at the variables, not publicly, internally. You don't start by opening the conversation with the board. You start by clarifying the conversation with yourself. I say that because I've seen the opposite. A CEO hears a rumor, or reads about a competitor transaction, or gets an exploratory call. And suddenly, the topic enters the boardroom before the structure behind it has been examined. That's backwards. Control before exposure means you've already thought through what would need to be true before any conversation moves. So if urgency rises, you don't feel rushed. You feel informed. There's a difference between nerves and compression. Nerves are natural. Compression changes behavior. Finally, information. Control of information isn't secrecy, it's organization. If someone requested clarity tomorrow, could you provide it without disrupting the institution? Board minutes, succession documentation, financial segmentation, shareholder agreements, key contracts. I've seen situations where gathering basic documentation became a project. When that happens, the tone shifts. Instead of evaluating the opportunity, you're trying to assemble the foundation. Buyers prepare before they inquire. Markets prepare before they move. The only question is whether you've prepared before exposure. If you haven't thought about this before, that's normal. You're trained to grow the bank, to manage earnings, to protect credit quality. Lawyers show up when a deal is active. Bankers show up when momentum begins. By then, the sequencing has already started. This isn't complicated. Control before exposure simply means you've clarified internally what happens if something happens. You've decided how information flows. You've thought through how timing would be evaluated. You've examined where alignment actually stands. Exposure doesn't create position, it reveals it. And once revealed, it's hard to rebuild quietly. I've watched that difference play out more than once. Two banks, similar performance, one steady when the call came, one scrambling. The difference wasn't earnings, it was clarity. So here's the only question that really matters. If you received an unsolicited call tomorrow, would you already understand how it would be handled? Or would you be figuring it out while everyone else is watching? Not emotionally, practically. If you know the answer clearly, you have control. If your answer begins with, we'd need to, ... you probably don't. And that difference determines leverage long before negotiation ever begins.